Jurassic Park has successfully solidified a place for itself in film history, not just for being a high point in mainstream Hollywood filmmaking, but for being the definitive turning point in attitudes towards computer-generated imagery. Until this film, there was not unanimous confidence that computers would successfully replace every other technique of visual effects. This film marks the moment we went digital and never went back. Even those few dinosaur filmmakers who try to avoid using CGI still end up using all manner of digital manipulation in their films. But hey, we don't enjoy films, remember films, and keep coming back to films just because they're historically significant. We keep coming back to films because they're emotionally significant. And that emotional significance usually stems from the inner transformation of the central characters. Even before introducing the central characters in Jurassic Park, the film establishes a few facts about them.
You telling me that Hammond can't even bother to see me?
He had to leave early. He wants to be with his daughter. She's getting a divorce.
Hammond values family. He's not some workaholic willing to sacrifice his own well-being for his career. But Grant, on the other hand,
He's a digger.
This subtly establishes one of the most recurring themes in all of American cinema, the dynamic between family and career. This is the vector along which the protagonist, Dr. Grant, will grow. He will begin on one end and end on the other end. When we first meet him, Grant and his people are busy digging up the past, studying the dead, treating it with tenderness, with care. They're enamored with it. This has to be one of the strangest protagonist introductions of all time.
I hate computers.
What a bizarre non sequitur, right? Well, not after a bit of reflection. Computers are the future. Dinosaurs are the past. This sets up a thematic web of interrelated terms and situates the protagonist squarely within them. Grant is a man who has chosen career against family, past against future, death against life. He is a man out of balance, whose relentless pursuit of, let's say, a masculine concept of success has led him to squander his own feminine, receptive, relational, and life-affirming energies. This attitude is translated visually into the symbol of the red scarf, tied around his neck at this very moment, as if trapping his words there over his throat to remind us of his imbalanced worldview.
A few more years development and we won't even have to dig anymore.
Where's the fun in that?
But Grant isn't bluffing. He actually does want to dig for fossils manually. He does not want the technology to develop to the point where they don't have to do the work by hand. And yet he still uses technology at every level of his work. They shoot Mother Earth with a violent, penetrative machine, conspicuously painted red just like his scarf, in order to receive what is, symbolically speaking, an ultrasound, albeit one which scans the long dead rather than the pre-born. But also note here that aside from establishing how Grant is allergic to technology, this moment sets up a contrast between two senses, the sense of sight and the sense of touch. The thumper translates touch into visual information, much like the infamous water gag later in the film. Grant can look, but he can't touch. But in case this conceptual symbolism isn't clear enough, Grant's worldview is simplified into one single characteristic. He hates kids. Not only that, but he believes that the correct way to interact with a child is to instruct them by instilling fear. This is a great moment of what K.M. Weiland calls a characteristic moment, where we learn about the character through a choice they make. Grant didn't have to scare the crap out of this kid, he chose to. It's also a great example of why such moments don't need to be moral actions. Grant doesn't save a cat, he traumatizes a child. We don't need a flashback showing us Grant's youth or expository dialogue delving into his backstory. This scene tells us everything we need to know. He's a man who was made to feel small by his own mentors and finds himself repeating that cycle, passing his pain on to the next generation. Also note that this is how you imbue props with significance. Grant uses the raptor claw to instill fear, and thus it comes to represent his attitude towards kids and the cycle of pain that he's passing on, a cycle that has been repeating since prehistory. So, when you're writing the first half of your first act, this is exactly what you're looking for. A succinct scene or two that establishes a thematic spectrum and situates your protagonist somewhere along that spectrum. It's as if Grant says to the universe here, "Look at me. This is how I am, and this is how I'll always be." And the universe replies by attempting to change him. It's as if God himself descends from the sky and says, "We'll just see about that." And that's exactly what the call to adventure represents. This helicopter is the herald who appears out of the blue, as it were, inviting the heroes to cross a threshold and enter a new world where they will either evolve or die. But before we cross that threshold and enter that new world, the script has one last thematic motif to establish. We meet Nedry, a traitor, a spy, a fake. He's given a fake can of shaving cream. And in case this wasn't clear enough, he places the shaving cream on a slice of pie. But why is fakery or visual deception a relevant theme to this film? Well, in the context of parenthood, this designates a biological parenthood without love. And in the context of the theme of technology, this designates spectacle without story. And with that, the thematics are established, and we're off. As they cross the first threshold and fly to the island, Grant wears blue with the same red scarf underneath. Ellie, on the other hand, wears pink with blue underneath. Their wardrobe here forms a kind of visual yin-yang, but before they even land, a genius piece of visual foreshadowing occurs here. Grant inexplicably has two female ends of his seatbelt.
You're implying that a group composed entirely of female animals will breed?
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
What is a seatbelt? It's a life-saving technology. So here already we're seeing how technology equals life. Remember, the appeal of this theme park is that dinosaurs, resurrected by the marvels of modern technology, embody not only the beauty of that technology, but the beauty of life itself. In a strange reverse logic, life needs to be artificially reconstituted in order for us to see the sheer natural beauty of it. Now, here it might be useful to make a distinction between two levels that the film works on. One is the thematic level, which directly relates to the narrative and the character arcs. In the case of Jurassic Park, this is centered around Dr. Grant's preparation for fatherhood. On another level, one which relates to the narrative but gets a bit more abstract or subliminal, this is a film about itself, about the havoc that computer-generated imagery will wreak upon cinema itself once it's released from its constraints. To drive home this analogy between the diegetic dinosaurs and CGI in the real world, both are constructed with text, that is, with code, with DNA. On one level, this is a self-reflexive movie, aware of its own place within cinematic history and the direction that it will lead, even hinting at the disavowed potentials of
autoerotica?
No.
Later, Malcolm says,
What do they got in there, King Kong?
as a nod to earlier cinematic technologies like claymation that figuratively opened doors for the medium, and were nearly used in this film too. Grant wields enough willpower to leave the automation, to stop following his script, to step through the boundary of the cinema screen itself, and to see how the film he's currently inside is made. And he finds that child rearing, the care for the young, is fully automated. That is, until Hammond shows up. A conspicuous jump cut here shows the robotic arm vanishing and Hammond appearing. This reinforces the idea that Hammond is the personification of the life-bestowing technology that makes Jurassic Park possible. He is God. Hammond is a fascinating foil for Grant. He is human-centric. He believes that people are the real miracle of Jurassic Park. He's generous. He believes in making the park affordable for everyone. This is a deliberate choice to avoid making Hammond into some kind of cartoonish villain, a man who's easy for the audience to hate. As a result, his flaw becomes one extremely specific thing.
When we have control again.
You've never had control. That's the illusion.
He believes he can control everything. Malcolm describes Hammond's scientific hubris as,
I call the rape of the natural world.
but before this philosophical discussion gets a little too serious, the film remembers its own target audience. Grant is so opposed to children that he literally runs away from Tim without saying a word to him, even though the kid is insanely smart and knowledgeable in Grant's own field and has even read his own book and wants to talk to him like an intelligent adult. Still, it's not enough. Grant simply doesn't like kids, and he doesn't want to. It has nothing to do with how smart they are. But just as Grant denies the children his positive paternal presence, he is in turn denied the visual pleasure of seeing the dinosaurs. For a second time, Grant wields the willpower to step out of the automation and enter into the wilderness of the park itself. There, instead of finding a dead dinosaur like they're used to, they find a dying dinosaur. This illness in the dinosaur triggers their maternal, nurturing, feminine sides. We see quickly that Grant actually does have the capacity to love a living thing, to touch it, and not just to see it. It's also no coincidence that on their way there, Grant touches the kids for the first time, helping Lex up when she falls and even holding her hand for a second after. But his human touch is not as developed as his sense of sight. In other words, his maternal side is not as developed as Ellie's, who immediately goes into full-blown mother mode. She's ready to care for this sick child, to sift through its poop, to touch its tongue, to weep at the sheer beauty of life. She is ready to have kids. Grant is not quite ready yet. So the universe conspires to create a crisis that will awaken his parental instincts. We see how quickly death swoops in as soon as technology fails. We see also that being an adult male has very little to do with being a father. Gennaro, the lawyer, proves himself a fake by instantly abandoning the children at the very first sign of danger. By contrast, Grant proves himself, despite his flaws, to be true. He does the very opposite. He dives out of safety and into danger in order to save the children. It's not a coincidence, too, that his method of saving the children is a purely visual distraction. This sequence positions Grant between two extremes: Gennaro, who is responsible without being loving, and Malcolm, who is loving without being responsible. He tries to help out, but despite his theoretical brilliance, he doesn't really have a real plan. This is why the responsibility for the children falls into Grant's lap and no one else's. He's the only one here who possesses the true potential for fatherhood. But saving children from a crisis is the bare minimum. Being a loving paternal figure is more than just doing the bare minimum.
He let us! He let us!
But that's not what I'm gonna do.
You can see Grant realize how good it feels to say this, to bear the responsibility of another human being.
It's just like coming out of a treehouse. Did your dad ever build your treehouse?
No.
Damn it.
Ironically, it's not over their shared knowledge of dinosaurs that Grant and Tim bond. It's over their absent fathers. It's not the mind that builds bonds, but the heart. Meanwhile, Ellie and Hammond bond over their absent family. As if justifying his own intentions in making the island in the first place, Hammond tells Ellie about his flea circus. What is a flea circus? Well, it's a visual illusion. The audience don't actually see the fleas because there are no fleas. They see only the signs of the fleas, the effects of the fleas. They fill in this emptiness with their own imagination. But Hammond longs to fill in this emptiness himself, to create something real, and his definition of reality is equated with two things.
Something that they could see and touch.
It's both visual and haptic, both automated and human, both yin and yang. His concept of reality is correct. If we define reality as just one or the other, as purely visual or purely haptic, we can be easily deceived. Grant approaches this same balance. He starts to grow more sensitive to touch, and that's why his previous attitudes start to bother him. Thus, he throws away the claw, which, remember, is a symbol of his own previously held beliefs that children are to be instructed with fear. But don't make the mistake of thinking that this is itself the arc. This is merely the symbol of the arc. This is the cherry on top. What really matters are the choices that the character makes. And Grant chooses to educate these kids not with fear, but with play. He chooses to use fear only playfully, just like Tim does earlier. He's discovering his own inner child. Even when the situation is dire, Grant tries to comfort Tim with touch. And even when Tim is literally dead, Grant finds that he possesses the power to give life. This is the mirror image of the Lysine contingency, which is the ability to take life. Hammond refuses to use it, and as a result, Grant must do the opposite, give life. Mike Hill, in his brilliant lecture on Jurassic Park, points out how the car becomes a symbolic egg. Both are shown with footsteps leading away. But what is born from this car egg? A new Grant, his new identity as a father. In both cases,
I found a way.
But we see this motif a third time in the film, when the raptors break out of their pen. Thus, there's actually an ambivalent attitude here. This may begin to explain why Oppenheimer's image is on Nedry's desk. Technology is both life and death. Grant and Ellie both face an ordeal at the end of the second act. Ellie must venture alone into the dark womb of Mother Earth, where the hope for life and the threat of death arise, while Grant, on the other hand, leads the children up into the sky, where the threat of Zeus's lightning bolt descends. In other words, Ellie develops her masculine side by battling demons in the underworld, while Grant develops his feminine side by bestowing life to children with physical touch. In Jungian jargon, the masculine encounters its anima, its own inner feminine side, while the feminine encounters its animus, its own inner masculine side. Note how Ellie's quest establishes barriers, while Grant's quest transcends the same barriers. And although Grant already threw away the raptor claw, it's only after he grants Tim the gift of life that he loses the red scarf. He no longer hates computers, the future, or children. The film is progressive in the sense that it doesn't simply see enlightened parenthood as the solution. The next generation themselves are the solution. Children are warriors on new planes of existence that the previous generation could scarcely comprehend. Children are not merely props in the adult's journey towards enlightenment. They are themselves heroes with roles to play in the new world that is on the horizon. In the end, Grant is willing to put himself between the children and certain death. He's ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. He has gone from a man that would scare a child to death just for fun, to a man who would lay down his life to make a child feel safe. In this sense, it doesn't really matter that there's basically a Deus Ex Machina ending here, because the character's inner change is so satisfying. Let this be a lesson to all writers. The success of your film has less to do with the cleverness of your plot and everything to do with the inner change of your protagonist. Two images dominate the conclusion. The mosquito trapped in amber, a symbol of the dead past, and the bird, a symbol of the living future.
Maybe dinosaurs have more in common with present-day birds than they do with reptiles.
A symbol of evolution. And what is the helicopter, if not our own wings? Is this not how humanity evolves as a species? Through technology? Can Icarus learn not to fly too close to the sun? Can cinema integrate computer-generated imagery without losing its soul? Jurassic Park is a life-affirming film that says yes. Though the Nedrys of the world will go blind, and their efforts to steal this techne will result in mud, we will find our way. We will evolve.
Jurassic Park is a cautionary tale. We stand on the shoulders of giants to create the next great thing, and yet we take no responsibility for our own creations.
I realized what electronics and digital technology was going to do to movies, and at first I was excited because I thought that would enable us to approach movies that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to do, because we'd be able to have scenery that was not totally have to build. And so I saw it as going to be a big boon to filmmaking. I didn't realize that it would be yet another kind of shackle on the cinema.
This film, unlike the majority of its monstrous sequels, remains so impactful 30 years on because its symbols are universally significant. What on the surface seems to be a simple roller coaster ride with spectacular visual effects is actually a very human story about two people being prepared for the ultimate adventure, parenthood. And by extension, it's a film about how our species progresses into the future, how we evolve into a technological age while maintaining our humanity.